Hello friends, it's Allison Vanderslice and thank you for joining me in another Slice It Up video. Today we're going to be taking this really pretty pastel and dark purple pattern paper that I had from the Secret Garden paper pad. And this is 6x6 pattern paper. The pastel pieces that you see in the back, the purple, pink, and blue, are going to be our card bases and also some of our matting layers. We're going to get started with creating those card bases. I'm going to use my paper trimmer and then a score tool because I don't have a scoring board or anything. I just use a paper trimmer. So I'm going to score all of our cardstock, which is 3 pieces of 8.5 by 11. I'm going to score the 8.5 side at 4 1/4, and then I'll rotate it and cut at 5.5. And I will do that for all 3 card bases. And now we'll get started with the pattern paper. I'm going to remove the little tab from the top. This is perforated so you could pull it off, but I'm just going to cut it to make sure I know I get everything off. And this is a 6x6 piece. So if you do have a 12x12 piece of pattern paper, you can always cut it down and use these measurements as well. I'm going to first cut at 2 inches. And then I'm going to take the other piece that we had that was 4 inches remaining. I'm going to rotate that and cut it at 3 inches. And I'm just looking to see where the bird placement is because I don't really want to chop off any birds' heads. I want to try to keep as much of them intact as possible. So I'm just going to rotate it around until I find a piece that I like the best. And then I'll cut it so that way we will have 2 pieces that are 4 by 3 inches. With one of the 4 by 3 inches pieces, we are going to just cut it in half at 1.5 inches. Again, I was looking to see if there would be a good placement for the bird, but I just decided to go with the measurements. With the other 4 by 3 inch piece, we are going to cut it on the diagonal. So I'm going to line up the corners the best I can in my little trimming blade area. I'm going to pick up the blade and put it in the middle of the paper so that way I don't damage the corners. And then we have our 2 triangular pieces. We're going to come back to that 2 inch by 6 inch piece, and then we're going to cut 4 pieces that are 1.5 inches wide. So we will have 4 pieces that are 1.5 by 2 inches. And then that gives us all our pieces. In the end, this is going to be able to make 4 cards, with 1 piece left over that I put in my journal. Now we're going to create some matting layers for our pattern pieces. I'm going to take one of the light blue card bases that I made and just chop off the front half of it. And then I'm going to trim this down to be 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm going to take the other half of that card base and cut 2 strips that are 2 inches wide and currently 5.5 inches long. In the bottom left corner, I just put the diagonal pieces on the 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece. And now I'm just going to trim up one of the 2 inch strips to be 2 inch by 5 1/4 inch. And I'm going to layer 3 of those 2 by 1.5 inch pieces on top. I realized that I probably should have made this 2 1/4 inches instead of 2 inches. So I will be putting another matting layer underneath that. As I was finishing that up, I just cut another 2 inch strip that was 4.5 inches long to use on one of those 4 inch by 1.5 inch strips. I'm going to do the same thing with the pink card base. I'm going to cut it in half and then trim it down to be 5 1/4 inches by 4 inches. And I will layer this underneath that one in the top left corner that you see up there. I'm going to cut another strip down to be 2 inches by 4¼ inches. You can choose whatever matting layers you want if you want to use white or black or gray. I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to use all these card bases, so I thought I would just trim them in half and use them as the matting layer since they matched really well. Now I'm going through and just using my bone folder to crease the card bases, and then we'll go ahead and use some liquid glue to attach our pieces together. While I'm doing this, I'll put on some music for your enjoyment. And there are the 4 card fronts that we created. We're going to go ahead and add the sentiments to our card fronts. I'm going to make all of these birthday cards, but you can use them for whatever holiday or season or occasion that you would like. Now before we use our embossing powder, we're going to use our anti-static powder tool. This is the embossing buddy from Stampin' Up. After I do the anti-static powder tool, I will ink up my stamp and then go ahead and stamp it on the card front. I'm going to be using some gold embossing powder to really make it pop off the blue. Dump off the excess, and then put that in the tub because we don't need to blow it around with our heat tool. After we close up the container, we'll go ahead and heat set it. We'll repeat the same process with this next card, but the happy birthday will go up into the top left corner. So I'm going to do the anti-static powder tool, ink up my stamp, stamp it in the top left corner, go ahead and put the embossing powder on, tap off the excess, clean up the excess, put it in the container, and then heat set it. And there are the two that we just stamped right onto the card front. We're going to step up these next two just a little bit more by stamping our sentiments onto scrap pieces of paper and then adhering them to the card fronts. So for this one, I'm going to be using the Sending You Birthday Wishes stamp set, or excuse me, stamp that came in a Paper Pumpkin subscription box. Again, I will use my anti-static powder tool for both, ink up my stamp, and go ahead and stamp it down onto the paper. Make sure you ink up both times. No second generation for this one. And then after we get them inked up, we will go ahead and put the embossing powder on and heat set that. Since this blue one is so small, I'm going to grab my reversible tweezers and put it down so that way I'm ready to go to heat set it. If you want, you can use a clothespin or even just your fingers, but I don't want to hurt myself today. After I clean up that embossing powder, I'll go ahead and start heat setting both of these. Now we're going to go ahead and try to adhere these to the card fronts. With the blue piece, I'm going to just adhere it onto a pink piece of scrap paper, a little bit bigger than that, so that way it pops off the blue card front. To give this card a little bit more dimension, I'm going to be using some foam squares to adhere the sentiment to the card front. If you wanted to, you could have taken that happy birthday stamp that we were using earlier and stamp it down the center diagonally, but I just wasn't feeling it for this card. I wanted to have something in the center. After removing the backing with my Take Your Pick tool, I'm going to go ahead, flip it over, and adhere to the card front. With the pink sentiment, I'm going to use my tailored punch tag from Stampin' Up! And go ahead and stamp that out. What's really cool about this is it actually left a banner piece, which I'm going to save for another card. Now, I wasn't thinking, and this is going to end up being pink on pink, so to step it up and make sure that you can see the sentiment, I'm going to use my VersaFine Mark ink and an ink dauber and go ahead and put it on the rim or the outside edge of our sentiment. After that, I'm going to put some embossing powder on. I'll clean up any edges that I think might need cleaned up, and then I will heat set it. This is just a dry paintbrush to wipe off any excess embossing powder. I have a little heat box that I made, which is just a small box with some aluminum foil folded up on the bottom. And this will hopefully just help this piece from curling up and keeping it nice and even when it's heating up. So here's what the piece looks like with the embossing powder around the outside. I do like what it adds to the piece. I'm going to put it on the card front to see what I think, and I do like it. I like that it is a little bit more stepped up. I'm going to add some foam squares to the back of it, again to give it some more dimension. I'll use my Take Your Pick tool to remove the backing of those foam squares, and then I will lightly place it down on the card front. Now, I still think that it needed a little bit more to bump up that left side where the pink is on the pink. So I'm going to just take some little gold pieces that I got from a Stampin' Up thing. I don't even remember what it's called, but it was just a whole bunch of gold pieces that you could punch out. I was going to use liquid glue, but I didn't want to risk accidentally smudging any on the outside of the card. So I'm just going to take some glue dots that I had left over from a Stampin' Up paper pumpkin kit. I'll remove the backing and then adhere that to the card front underneath the sentiment. That just gives that pink a little bit more lift off the front of the card. And there we have those two that are a little bit more stepped up than the first. And there we have our 4 birthday cards, but again, you can make them for any occasion. Thank you so much for joining me in today's Slice It Up video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like this video, and if you like my content, feel free to subscribe. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!